I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Paramount people for the land that we are here all gathered on today. We have a ceremony that we would like to share with you, a smoking ceremony. And I'd like to hand over to my son, Kyle, to explain to you the process of the ceremony, why we're doing it, and also introduce himself and welcome you here to country.
Paramount are at a centre point for trade between neighbouring groups. I'd like to acknowledge those neighbouring groups: the Ngarrindjeri, the Kaurna, the Ngangaraku and the Ngākat people. I'd also like to pay my respect to elders past, present, future, young emerging representatives and leaders of culture, and welcome you all here today as we are gathered on Paramount Water. And it's to not only cleanse the land, but yourself of any bad spirits, and let the ancestors know that we are all gathered here on Paramount country.
I'd like to welcome Kylie and Brad up to the stage. Thank you.
So we were invited by Hills and Fleurieu Landscape Board to come and have a short talk about Kaurna land management practices. Before I begin, I do want to acknowledge our brothers and sisters of the Paramount Nation and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. If we were on Kaurna country today, I would start my talk by saying Namarni. So Namarni means, well, Na is you all, and Marni is good. You say, you're all good. If you're all good, you can say Marni I. So Marni, it means, are you good? Are you happy? Are you healthy? Are you fat? Because for Kaurna, all those things are good things. For our old people, if you were these things, it meant that country was Marni. It was abundant and sustaining us. When I talk about country, I'm not just talking about the landscape or the land. It's the plants, the soils, the animals. It's the people. It's you and me. Our waters, skies and stars. And for Kaurna, none of these things can truly be healthy if they aren't all healthy. So our land management is a holistic approach. These days we tend to separate all of these things when we want to heal and care for them. But in doing this, we tend to overlook things. We stop looking at the bigger picture. And sometimes we actually create problems in the future because we do miss things. Our old people knew that everything had to be holistic. 80,000 years of sustainable living shows us this. Everything we needed was provided within this landscape. All of our foods, all of our medicines, any clothing, our shelter, everything came from the landscape and everything returned to the landscape, including us. Our diets were incredibly biodiverse. We ate kangaroos, emus, possums, we had lizards. All of the plant species we ate were diverse. So I like to say my favourite veggies are broccoli, cauliflower and cabbage. They are all brassica species. That is not a very diverse diet for my gut. But when I talk about our native food plants, a lot of these are different genus. As with our animals, Even soils were integrated into our diets in small amounts. If you see pictures of our old people, they were the fittest, healthiest looking people, and it's because of our diets. We consumed seasonally, and our medicines were a part of our diets as well, which kept us healthy. So as I've already said, our landscape was abundant, it was thriving, and it was a sustaining land prior to colonisation, when unfortunately this land was cleared. So our beautiful supermarkets were cleared to grow monoculture crops or to graze animals that didn't actually belong here. These things required more resources, irrigation, tilling of soils, replanting. Sometimes we had to grow crops for the grazing herds to be able to eat. But our grasslands, our native grasslands alone contained multiple species within them that we could consume. So our grasslands had the grains that we could eat. They had lots of tuberous plants through them. They had lots of little berries that we could eat. And our grasslands also provided food source for the local animals, which we can also consume. We didn't need, our grasslands had annual and perennial species throughout them. We didn't require to regularly till them or sow seeds. The only thing we really required was a bit of fire management. So over the past few years, Kaurna Nation has been relearning some fire management practices and reintroducing it to the landscape in a hope that we can help to restore some of our ancient grasslands and our old food systems. Because in my mind, that is the direction we need to go with our food sourcing and our food supply. We need to work with country again and eat and consume foods that are of this land. It's healthier for us and it's better for the landscape. I'm going to hand over to you, Brad, to divulge a bit more into that, if that's all right.
Thanks, Kwali. A bit louder. Yeah. So yeah, like, as Kwali's already said, applying the right fire to country is the way that we are looking at managing land. It's a holistic approach to land management, and it's been done for thousands and thousands of years. So we're reintroducing that practice, and it's a really exciting thing to be a part of. It's really rewarding from a spiritual perspective, to be re-engaging with a cultural practice that has that effect on you as a person. You're practicing culture, and that's a part of our healing. And Kwali's already talked about how the land can't be healthy in a silo. So we've got to stop thinking about these things in silos. We're all a part of that system. And so it's a myth that wild Australian bush is how it all should be. It's about people managing that land, and always was. In those early journals, you've got records of the early colonisers coming in and writing down about the country that they stepped foot on. They've just come off the boats, those big tall ships in Port Misery, and they're all dying of scurvy and really sick and struggling with their walk from Port Adelaide all the way through to places like Carndorf. to establish Hahndorf and stuff like that, and they treacherous journeys. They didn't understand how hot it got here or how cold it could get at night. And they get there and they try and apply their classic farming techniques of tilling and growing rows of wheat. And there's stories of when they got there, before they decided to do that stuff, they wrote down things like, "This is God's country. This is amazing. This is pristine. This is unbelievable." They couldn't believe it. They actually thought, because a lot of them had perished during that journey, that by the time they got to Hahndorf, they were so sick and so tired that they thought that God had given them that land. And they tried to grow their crops, and they failed. They prioritised their crops over their homes, over their shelters. And so First Nations people helped them by showing them how to find food, showing them where they could get shelter so that they could survive that first season and then try again the next season with their crops. And those stories are everywhere in all the journals. Walking like on the land feels like you're walking on clouds because of all those soft native grasses, all managed with fire. Not dense bushland, open up with parent trees here and there, all managed by people for thousands of years. Not just let go, not just run rampant, managed constantly by people for thousands of years. So that's really exciting to be a part of that. And I like to also talk about sovereignty, because a lot of these discussions around regenerative ag and soil remediation and carbon sequestration and all of that sort of stuff, they're all kind of centred around this idea of localised food sovereignty as well. And I think that it's really important to have these conversations, and we need to be doing everything we can to try and mitigate against climate change and have localised food systems. But we also need to remember that, and not forget, that when we're talking about food sovereignty or any kind of sovereignty, land is at the heart of that. So when we're regenerating the land, we're regenerating the people. With sovereign land, what is happening to that land? Who's working that land? Who owns that land? How can we bring in, I was asked to come and talk about decolonising food and agriculture as well a bit today. How can we start to talk about, and I also want to say that I'm not the most knowledgeable person on decolonising methodologies, and I pay my respects to my elders and people in community who have fought long and hard to be pioneers in that field, and they're the people that should be here talking to you about decolonising in a broader sense. But I can say that we need to start thinking seriously about, what it is that farmers in the regen ag community can bring to the table for First Nations communities. Regenerating the soil is one side of the coin. It's great, we need to do that. But we also need to think about, okay, how is this going to benefit First Nations communities? How can we bring that in? What can we bring to the table? What all farmers can bring to the table? That unique thing is land. And young farmers in this room struggling to find land. I believe that's one of the discussions that's going to be had during the course of the day. It is a struggle to find land. It is a struggle to get hold of land when you're a young farmer. Our people, our old people, our communities have been struggling with getting hold of our own land for a long time. I think that we need to start looking at those farming communities, governments, and really start thinking, well, how can we work together to benefit communities? And that means allowing us to have those conversations around building frameworks for access to land or parcels of land being given back to communities, that sort of thing. Because that allows us to practice our culture, to do fire land management practices. At the moment, we're having to negotiate all the time with government to try and get access to pockets of land, to do our cultural practices. One of the great things about the fire management practices that we've been doing is that And one of the healing things for us is that we know what we're doing is opening up that land for everyone else in our community to access our cultural materials, to access our sacred sites, to access our tools, our artifacts that have been there waiting for us, to access our native seed banks. And so access to land is always on our mind, always at the front of our mind, because that is everything. Land ownership, land access, that's at the heart of sovereignty. And so for us to be sovereign people, for us to have our own food security and food sovereignty, we need to look at those perspectives of First Nations people as well. There's a bunch more that I'd like to say as well, but that's about time for us. So, Kylie, did you have anything else? Yep. Thank you.